So good morning again, Colonel Thiele. Thank you so much for accepting the Defense and Securities Monitor invitation for this interview. It's a huge pleasure to have you within the Must Talks series. I would like to start with a question about Germany because I know you have great military experience in this field, in the defense and security field, but more particularly in the German armed forces. So we know that at the moment Germany is going through a modernization or transformation process, not only when it comes to its readiness, so its military equipment, but also when it comes to the military service. So I want to ask you, what do you think of all this process within the context of this, let's say, fragile security environment in Europe?
Yes, indeed, Germany is on a fast track to improve. Now, when you look at the plans dealing with that, we first have a look backward. Why backward? Because we are aware of plenty of deficiencies we have in the German armed forces, and this is not just numbers, but it's also quality that is lacking. And so from there, we try to fill these gaps that are there with material, with personnel to get forward, while we are globally in a disruptive innovation path. So means our focus still is, from my assessment, too much focused backward in terms of getting artillery, air defense, all these kind of things right, while it's not just drone warfare. Actually, it's a kind of data warfare that we are looking for. We're getting data, assessing data, employing data, making them actionable is a real thing. And this is starting to happen right now, that we turn around, but we have not done so. And a lot of things that we have ordered are not there yet at the moment. And what should I say, a decisive, certainly departure is a strategic partnership we have entered with Ukraine, because the most important thing, I don't think that gets across in the public, the most important thing is that we can use data from Ukraine, its warfare with Russia, in principle to train our artificial intelligence on the weapon systems we are going to acquire and train. So we are doing preparatory steps to get ready. And as Germany is a strong player just by numbers in Europe, this also will have a certain effect, I guess, on our European partners. So this is an important development, not just for Germany as such, but also for the partners we have.
We know that there are also plans to increase the number of military personnel in Germany. Do you think at the moment Germany, let's say in a hypothetical scenario, if Germany would be attacked by a foreign enemy, would be ready to face and actually counter that attack?
Well, we would face it necessarily. It reminds me a little bit of what our government said with the Strait of Hormuz. This is not our war, but it is our war because it affects us. And so it is, if an attack comes with our peaceful mind we have today, we would have severe difficulties to deal with it. But actually, if somebody would come, we would necessarily turn around and do so. So I'm full of trust that if there ever should be war with German involvement, we would deal with it. Can we deal with it effectively to a degree? Yes, because we are getting better with terms of quality and numbers. Also, personnel, I will say something additionally on the personnel issue. So we are getting better, but we are not alone. This is the real crucial thing, is we are not alone. We always work together. And in fact, when you look in our structures, our army actually shares bodies like corps with the Netherlands, with Poland. So there are a lot of initiatives where we are integrated, and we have a long-standing relationship with others like France, Britain, etc. So from there, I think, yes, we can deal with it, but we can deal with it increasingly better. This is, I think, what the point is. So every day that goes by puts us in a better position. And the only critical question that remains here is, will the US stay with us or not. But even this doubts Trump's is entering is helpful for us, because we could sit comfortable in our chair and lean back in the past because we knew the Americans would come. Now that we know that we cannot be sure that they're coming, we are much more eager to improve. So this is good. So personnel-wise, actually, I think we are lacking something like 15,000, 20,000 soldiers from our present structure that we have. And we had some initiatives in the past decades and also in the past years. So, I mean, even actually, we are not doing very well and with getting fresh personnel. And there are, this is new, two numbers actually we have to look at. While our administration, government always talks about the new hired personnel, they don't address the issue of personnel that quits service because it doesn't like to work in the armed forces. So we just look at the numbers that come on top, but actually some are leaving. And I think this is a very difficult, dangerous development. Anyhow, right now we have the best recruiting ever. So in the past decade, let me put it this way. No? So it's there's a steep way up, but you have to look at those that come to the armed forces and are not so happy what they see and what they experience, and then go again because they say, this is not my life. So this is a real strain, and I guess this is not just a German problem, this is an international problem as well. So we have to present them an environment that they find attractive, and we have, what you say, to motivate them to stay, even if life is full of strains when you are in the armed forces. No? So you have to get this right, and you have to have a population that supports it. I recall just having recently visited Israel, where I talked to young soldiers as well, though, and they just came from Australia and other parts of the world and then became recruits, and the family finds it is good. They are proud of their children, and such a kind of attitude we have to develop here as well. So defending your country is something of honor that you can be proud of, but it requires, and you can also see that in Israel particularly, more than Ukraine, that excellent support, weapon systems, all kinds of technologies. No? While Ukraine moves out of a necessity because it doesn't have sufficient armor and all kinds of weapon systems, reconnaissance, etc. It doesn't have it. Israel has it, and this gives the soldiers, even against tough enemies, this feeling, I'm supported well, the population supports me well, and this is something we have to achieve here as well, I guess, to be really in a position to be successful if somebody should attack us.
You were mentioning earlier the drone and the defense agreement actually between Germany and Ukraine, and we know that some aspects of it are regarding the drone productions, and at the moment there are drones being produced in Germany in cooperation with the Ukrainian industry. Recently, however, Russia has threatened the countries which are cooperating with Ukraine in drone production. Do you think Germany should be worried at the moment because of these threats?
Well, a small correction, everybody is in Ukraine. So when you look at doing things somewhere abroad, no, they have to be in Ukraine because they desperately, for the production of weapons and development of weapons, need to understand the combat environment, and that's just why it's so important to be there. And actually, the German companies that are producing for Ukraine, more or less all of them are in Ukraine and also build their facilities, which is a kind of a difficult issue, I would say, because in a way here is a dependency developing from Ukraine, if this exercise is successful, that we have to think about from policy perspectives for the future. Now, looking here at how would Russia like it, it doesn't like it. Actually, it bombs these facilities in Ukraine, obviously, and we have here a hybrid war ongoing, very subtle, but to a way also effective when you see that you have attack threats to company CEOs. So knowing many of the CEOs, I know 80–90% will be affected psychologically by such threats. So this will affect their performance and their policy. So this is already a challenge. We have then infrastructural challenges on all kinds, on traffic things, be it air traffic, train traffic, road traffic, bridges, all kinds of everything that are threatened. We have all kinds of cyber threats there that I think are also important. Just look at Ukraine in the first days of war, where the war actually started before the war already with cyber attacks on satellites, pretty effective, and we had to take all our assets together to overcome this issue. The problem with cyber attacks is once you run the attack, the other knows it and can take preparations. So the Russians certainly will hold back a number of options they have in cyber attacks, so that we maybe not be too well prepared. So all these things are happening these days. We have a hybrid war going on a low scale. This can be much higher, this hybrid threat, but it runs on a relatively low performance, but what should I say, recognizable. So you take notice, it's taking place, and it has effects. So coming back to your question, yes, we should expect that this has effects in the hybrid warfare on us, and certainly Putin will put additional force into this endeavor, and we have to become better in defending against it.
But apart from the hybrid war, which is indeed developing not only in Germany but in other countries as well, Romania has been a target of a hybrid war equally. Also, General Carsten Breuer said recently that by 2029 or 2030, Russia could be waging war against a NATO country, but a conventional war. What do you think about that? Do you think Europe at the moment, or let's say in 2029, hypothetically, will be ready to face such a war? Would that be possible?
I think I hear that as well. I'm always, I raise my eyebrows, I would say, every time I hear that. The first thing, it's not just him, General Breuer, it's also the head of our intelligence services or that keep on. And my first question comes, what have you done the past 4 or 5 years to protect us against this? No? So I think this threat anyhow is spreading fog about the responsibilities of the persons. And in principle, they want to encourage to pick up more speed, but as I said, with little own activity. So when you look at the standard we have in Germany since the war against Russia, against Ukraine from Russia has begun, the first year we didn't order any ammunition. How can you see a war going on without ammunition? Then we have a very poor air defense that was able to protect 2 larger areas like Berlin or Hamburg. Then we gave half away of our air defense capabilities to Ukraine so that we would be able to protect 1 area. So you can see that, and all of this is happening. We give back what is this, a quarter of our artillery capabilities, and just have a few. While we have 10,000 of pieces in the east, we had something like 100. Effective, just 40 available, the others, and then we give 10 plus to Ukraine. So you can see this is all, to me, it's very, very strange what's happening, and in a way also shows that the own awareness of threat is not too strong. And so what they try to do is to have a turnaround. And then they link this to these Russian exercises that happen every couple of years. So we had in 25 a couple of publications. This may be our last summer in peace. Very noticed in media. The next exercise actually comes in 29. Surprise, surprise. we elect a new government in 29. Surprise, surprise. So you can shift it to the next government. So you see all these kind of things are real. On the other side, I have to say, honestly, of course, what we see in Ukraine, Russia is trained for warfare against the West. So while we do not train, we have started general training more or less last year, and so that these exercises that I have known in the 70s and 80s of the last century, we had 10,000s of soldiers and vehicles around. Now we have some hundred, perhaps 1,000 vehicles moving on. So we now talk about what enormous effort we take. It's all tiny from our system, but at least we do it. No? We start doing it. We learn how much more we have to do. So from there, saying we are turning the ship, the tanker, the big tanker around, have had some success already. So it's promising. Have still too much focus to the past, and lack the speed and dynamics in moving forward with new systems. The good thing to me actually is the general that was actually helping our Minister of Defense in dealing and supporting Ukraine is now the new Army Chief of Staff. He is enormously gifted, not just tactically, operationally, but also making things happen. So it appears to me that we are now getting military leaders in charge that understand their job. So there is even more hope to what I've said. So it's okay. But I'm not thrilled about the 29. The real thing is the Russians have training every day on dealing with Western weapon systems. They have a good recruiting. It works well. They have, well, this is now double-sided sword. They have turned their economy around, made it a war economy, which the problem is you cannot do that endlessly. At some stage, your economy implodes. So this is a question, perhaps some had that in mind in the US when this whole war started, to do it like Reagan, to have the East implode and then make it capitalistic. So more or less that is a kind of plan. This is a threat to Russia. How long can it sustain it? But I would suspect rather longer than shorter. And so we are getting a critical mass of personnel, of material, of experience with very innovative approaches. They don't have the problem of environment protection and all this stuff that makes our equipment expensive. So from there, even as a small economy, this is not a big economy, they can really threaten us. But 29 is just a token. It's not a threat to me.
At the moment, it's not just Germany that is going through a modernization process, but we see that all European countries are doing that because of the war in Ukraine, of course, and these threats coming from Russia. There are many programs at the moment, like the SAFE program of the European Union, which was, let's say, adopted by many countries. What do you think of all these movements? From what you've seen so far, do you think that the European countries are focusing, when it comes to defense and military equipment, on what it needs to actually be able to respond to a war or just deter a war in the modern world?
Well, I'm not too convinced of what I see with the European programs. There are good reasons for it, but it has a bad consequence. The good reason is the European Union is a peace project. This is very important. It has been after World War II and World War I. It has been very important to have this focus. The downside of that is you have a lack of competence to deal with war. Means when you have plenty of experts that all know focus on environment, economy, etc., but have no background in war fighting, and this has a war economy, innovation, all kinds of things, you lack this capability. And when you look at these European programs, they are not very strong. So one thing that really disappoints me now after 4 years of war, which I say the war economy, so defense industry, is not considered to be an important, relevant industry. So banks are not allowed to give them best conditions if they want to invest. How can that be after 4 years? No? And it's our commissioner, Frau von der Leyen, actually, that's in charge of that. So you can hear her every year encouraging the environment to get better, but she could order it. You understand? It's not, she needs not to encourage, she needs to do on that. And actually her staff isn't doing that and she is not looking at that. So from there, we can easily buy tax-free US equipment. We cannot buy tax-free our own equipment. No? So while at the same time, they're encouraging us to get stronger, have a more autonomy, a better level of autonomy. But in principle, the action is not very professional that takes a look at that. And so in principle, most of these European programs we have throw money at defense. This is the standard how EU acts on anything, also on innovation, on quantum, or whatever you take, they throw a degree of money. It looks on the European level big, but when you look compared to what we do for car industry, it's tiny, not really visible. So they throw a couple of billions here, a couple of billions there, then big industry comes and takes it off. It's gone. So you don't really see the program. So I'm not impressed. And then, of course, you can see that these days on the Straits of Hormuz, again, when we talk about European engagement, still a French president would look how French industry could have an advantage from that. British prime ministers would look how British things have an advantage of what they're doing. So in principle, while we are better in cooperating, we are still on, what should I say, on 20% of 100% or so. It's not, to me, it's not impressive at all what's happening. And of course, adversaries, opponents see that. Huh? If I can notice it, they can notice it well. They have a whole intelligence apparatus to look at that. And by the way, even Romania looks skeptical at it. When I come to Romania, I can see how much activities you have with neighbors outside the European Union. So everybody knows it. So I'm not impressed. I see there is action taken, fine. Is it adequate? No.
Mm. You are talking about opponents, and at the moment, opponents can also see that there is a tense relationship between the European countries and the United States, especially within NATO, because we know that President Donald Trump, as you are also mentioning at the beginning of this interview, threatened to take the US out of NATO. Some even worried that by the summit in Turkey in July, he will actually announce that. It's not the first time, of course, he also did it, or at least threatened in 2018 to do the same thing. At the moment, you think that there is this possibility of US withdrawing from NATO? And what could happen with the European countries? Yes, there are movements. Yes, they are modernizing their armed forces. But could they still be able to deter a war or even defend themselves in a war without the United States?
Well, I think the things are different than they appear to most people and also analysts. I had the privilege to be the first German in the private office of the NATO Supreme Commander. So I was participating in the liberation of Kuwait and many other things. So I just know firsthand how the system works. How does the system work? The US have divided the world in continents. They have continental commanders, which they call combatant commanders. These combatant commanders, in the European case, it's in fact the Supreme Allied Commander Europe, NATO. The NATO commander, he also has a US head, a European command. Actually, the Africa command is also located in Germany. He has an own intelligence service that just works for him, has several carrier groups, has all kinds of things. He advises all diplomats in Europe before they take their office. They come to him 2 months in Belgium to take orders. He communicates every evening, 1824, with the White House, with the Pentagon, gets orders, reports on things. So the US can only have a kind of supremacy in the world through their allies. And having not their allies on board weakens them considerably. I think Trump doesn't understand this in detail because he never has worked in this environment, but by the time he learns it, it's eventually it happens. So why should he weaken himself? He won't do that. From there, no sweat. Number two is NATO works through interoperability. When you look, they had what was the Goldwater Nickel Act in the US in the 80s when the Americans were fighting Grenada. The Army, Navy, Air Force would shoot at each other in Grenada. They didn't have real resistance there. They just wrongly thought their own forces would be enemy forces and would fight them. From there, they have started to foster this interoperability worldwide so that they can cooperate. This is a very important aspect. So the key essence of NATO is the interoperability. So like Babylon, you have everybody speak with each other together instead of what happened in Babylon, as we recall historically, where plenty of nations came together, didn't understand, and then it imploded. So we have this ability to get this together. So from there, this is a real strength of NATO that never is spoken about, that is there, available, and enables us, even despite political differences, to build coalitions very fast and effectively. Now, the next thing is the real bad thing Trump does is when he speaks with Putin, he speaks about all the deficiencies and lack of trust he has in NATO. So he weakens the strongest ally himself. He weakens the power of the US himself. So this is in principle the real threat. It's a kind of inner hybrid threat he poses to his alliance and to his country. I'm not sure he grabs that, and I'm not sure even he ever will. So from there, this is the point of problem we have. We don't have that actually on the military levels. So even this Supreme Allied Commander that works for him is somebody who takes care that this interoperability works, because he knows there is no option for the Americans to succeed. They have in Ramstein, for example, all global drone operations. They have all kinds of things where he needs Germany as a partner, but also NATO. Same applies right now. All the ships that come in go through Crete. The restoration of the carrier has taken place in Greece. So a lot of things he needs us desperately for. And so from there, I think what he does, in fact, is encourage Putin, encourage us Europeans to become better and to rely less on the US, but not to rely not on the US. No? We just take precautions that we get along without it. So yet hypothetically, if ever America would leave the alliance, which again, I think it's utmost against its own interests, so I don't think this is true, but take it hypothetically, if they would ever leave it, well, Germany is the third most mighty economic power in the world. It's then Mercedes, BMW, VW start producing war equipment. You understand? Russia has no chance. Has no chance just by Germany. But we don't do that alone. We have Finland, Sweden. Look at all these capable nations that are there. Netherlands next to us, of course, France and Britain. So we would then get our act together. But I think it's not necessary. What happens is a shift in autonomy. So the Europeans strive for more autonomy, and they will achieve that because Trump drives us there and Putin drives us there. In this case, Putin is also an enabler of European power. Fine, I can live with that.
I think President Emmanuel Macron was speaking about strategic autonomy a while ago, a few years ago. However, could that actually work within Europe? Because, of course, we know that European countries collaborate and then they have alliances and bilateral agreements and so on. But at some point, these European countries as well don't get along on several topics. Do you think that could work? That could unite the European countries more? Because, for example, at the moment, also between France and Germany, there are some misunderstandings, let's say, when it comes to defense, to some projects, some defense projects.
Well, I think Macron is a bad example. Much talk, little action. I'm much more convinced of the Brits, actually, which are also not doing well these days. But Lord Robertson had run a defense review last year, and I've been very impressed by that, because when you look at that, this was clearly focused on the link of industry, innovation, and security armed forces. So the question was how many drones we want to produce, how much labor is covered by that, how many exports do we want to have, what kind of innovation we want to build in that. I've not seen any European nation being so focused on this issue. There are some good nations, Netherlands, Finland, but in principle, they have smaller modules that they can contribute. No? The Brits are, of course, a trendsetter, and I think we could learn a lot of them. And here, Macron talks about ambition, but means in principle ensure French dominance, which he doesn't have. So it's a kind of mistake in assessments anyhow, but it's okay that he strives for it. So I have no problems for him striving for this kind of lead function, but making it real is kind of difficult. You can see that even the air defense. So they were very disappointed that Chancellor Scholz had, when he ordered the Arrow systems, a very important decision, actually his best, I would think of in his government time, that he hadn't checked it with the French before, because what they wanted to do with Italy is just have their systems entered in this thing. But you see, this is not the point. The point was, in fact, that the previous anti-missile defense or the missile defense programs we had would cost 2 to 3 digit billion number of euros. Here we now get with 4 billion billions. What a difference against a 3-digit billion number. A real strengthening of European anti-missile defense. So that's enormous. And so, of course, you could have entered afterwards, although Italian and French systems into that. That's all fine. So being disappointed in this, for this case, not joining such an important initiative for Europe, it just shows you how little he really cares about European defense. No? I think it's plausible and okay that you strive for own benefits, but you also should always have, at least as a secondary objective, have European capabilities in mind. No? And I cannot see that with him. Not too much with the Brits as well, but they know they cannot sell their stuff without a kind of cooperation, so they enter the train. So it's at least perhaps not the best reason, but they do it. So from there, it's fine to me. So from there, yes, we Europeans can get along. And here comes now a different thing. Again, most people, what should I say, witness life through their eyes and ears. Smell also, but smell is more distant than war, so eyes and ears. But the real thing that is important for success are data. You don't see data, you don't hear data, you just see the effect. Now the point comes when I had a visit to Japan, I was asked, why do we leave this data business with US and Chinese companies? Why don't we come up with an own thing? I think this is the hottest of all issues that affects our economies as well as our security, including defense. So in fact, we have the capacity here, we have intelligent people, we have excellent industry. Why don't we build up data communication hub capability of European format? Perhaps in cooperation with Asian powers. In this case, Japan is really at present the only option we would have, because South Korea is very closely related to the US, so we buy US. India is enormously corrupt. We still have to look. India could be another very important thing, but Japan is there. It's very capable, very innovative there. So this is an option. So I think when we talk about autonomy, we don't need words, we need action, and we need a kind of collaboration, federation that that prioritizes European, and in this case, if we would have that with Japan, European-Japanese industry and security requirements, and make that also to an export model. This so have it not just as an inner basis for all this, but also make it an export model. This would strengthen our autonomy to a large degree and would not hamper us to cooperate with others, including the US. No? So it's not an anti-US, it's just an autonomy bundle that does combine the two most important things when our government swears in, when they take on a new government, they swear to protect the well-being and security of our people. You see, this data thing is the most important thing. It's not words. Of course, you need also ideas, and it's not just steel industry or whatever, maritime industry. This is much too short in the view of the things, but we need to set the case right to be able to prosper and to be able to be secure. And actually, this is the way how the Americans have organized their alliances without the knowledge of the president. and it works well for them. No? Why shouldn't it work well for us?
I think it's a fair and interesting point. We see how important data is in the war in Ukraine, and we saw those movements of the US stopping data sharing with the Ukrainian armed forces, how data is important also in the Middle East war. But speaking about the war in Ukraine, which is the closest to Romania, of course, because we share the longest land border with Ukraine, how do you see this war developing in the future? Because we see that the negotiations are at the moment suspended. They are blocked.
I just have to interrupt for a moment, so forgive me. You just have to have a look at the message.
I was saying that data is very important, and we've seen that in the war in Ukraine, also in the war in the Middle East right now, so the war in Iran. But speaking about the war in Ukraine, how do you see that developing in the following years, we could say, or months? Because negotiations at the moment between Russia and Ukraine are suspended. We see that President Donald Trump is still criticizing Volodymyr Zelensky, but not necessarily Vladimir Putin. So how do you see the future of that war?
Well, it's a mess. It is a mess in anything. Let's start with the Ukraine population. I don't think it ever was a good idea to go to war, and I've suggested so when it started. No? So this is not a hindsight issue, because as a soldier, as a military, I know what war is, and I know how war develops, and you have extreme losses with the population, which I pity most. This is really the thing. Number two, the soldiers have a very difficult life. In principle, because of solidarity, we don't speak about that. But I already expressed 3 years ago that the US changed their operational concepts, because they said from now we have to expect losses of more or less 1,000 soldiers a day. This is and this affects the Ukraine. Of course, they always denied it. They may have less casualties than the Russians, but they have enormous casualties. So and this is a very miserable, poor life they have in the front lines. So they never were prepared for war. Even the first war days, they were not well prepared. They were very lucky that the Russians just didn't take over. They were very lucky that they got American weapon systems, particularly anti-tank, etc., and made a real bloody mess among the Russians in these days. No? It's something we don't talk about, but it sets in principle the tone for the war. And then we have Butcher and other things, no? Because again, you can look at Vietnam, you can look at Korea, you can look at any of these wars. They don't develop well. So you knew that from the beginning. And what we see right now, that there's a degree of limbo, well, I would say retreat Ukrainian limbo. So they don't stop, but the Russians are gaining ground. Very slow, with much losses, but also with much losses on the Ukrainian side. So they are gaining ground. And this war is not, as many understand it here, a kind of case in point where we can learn a lot about, because it is a World War I war where, because of our miserable approaches to get artillery munition, EU, no, they never got the 1 million we promised there. So they turned on to drones. Now, more or less by real life, found that it's very usable, but drones is not war as well. Drones is much more complex. I think the electronic wars, again, this is a data and a spectrum, light spectrum, magnetic operations war. These are more important. In principle, you have to look from satellite to undersea cable. It's much bigger than what we see in the front in Ukraine. So the Ukraine is not well prepared. They have lost America as a supporter. Europe cannot compensate it because it also has then to protect itself. You cannot spend all the money without looking at the well-being of the public in our countries. So all this is not taking good direction. And at the same time, we produce longer-reaching weapons into Russia, which means that they even want to retaliate stronger than they did up to now. Kiev still is a nice place. That needs not to be like that. No? Mm-hmm. And it's not so that neighbors, including you, should not be affected. No? You indirectly you are anyhow, no? By refugees and criminal things and all kinds of things. No? And of course, this is growing like the hybrid warfare that started already 2014 in the eastern neighborhood. No? It's now has reached our countries, no? And so it is with all the other aspects. And I'm sure we will see plenty of drones in criminal hands in our own cities here employed, and all this comes out as an aftermath. So the sooner we can stop the war in Ukraine, the better. But unfortunately, Europe has no strategy to this end. They're just supporting, without deep thought, just supporting Ukraine in a way like we use the Americans, let them do the job, we pay for it. This was our attitude towards America. That is what our attitude towards Ukraine. And at the same time, we radicalize both parties, the Russians as well as the Ukrainians, which makes them a more difficult neighbor in the future once the war has ended. So it's a mess. It's an economic mess to us. It's a mess towards the resources, because when you take technology as a key driver for prosperity and defense, without these critical resources, we cannot make it against China and India and Indonesia and many others that are there. So this is very unwise, what I see there. And I would suggest a very fast, radical change in policy that takes care of the Ukrainian people and is not stuck in fundamentalisms.
Mm. Thank you so much, Colonel Thiele, for everything. That was all from me. Thank you for sharing your perspectives with our leaders.
Yeah, it has been a pleasure. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing products now from you. No, you think of me, no? When you want to publish it, so.